Do we know?
I think they're called the government, aren't they?
No, don't be glib. You know what I mean. Is that
not being glib? I think the answer to that.
I told you off. I sounded like a school teacher then. My apologies.
Now let's look at this brilliant LBC caller's superb take on the White House war plan leak. Now, LBC's James O'Brien was talking about this major scandal when, just before the hour, he received a call from Anthony from Bletchley Park, and he was absolutely brilliant. Sorry. I'm just going to hide under the table.
Can I come out from underneath the table where I'm hiding at the moment?
It is that bad. Let's be absolutely clear about this. And the problem is that it's part of a process, isn't it? It's the latest bad thing to happen since the last bad thing, but this is a bad thing of an entirely different order. This is sort of January the 6th bad, albeit in an entirely different way.
Yeah. There are three big issues I'd like to pick up on. Just first one, which is associated to it. You can't accidentally add anybody as Signal. I use it. You've actually got to. It's an act of commission. You have to add a user.
They thought he was someone else and didn't have the wit to establish that with beyond reasonable doubt, and then they stuck him on it, but with someone with the same initials apparently.
Okay, but I mean, I'd be interested to know if the Atlantic is such an awful publication in the eyes of the Trump regime, why they had that phone number in the first place.
I didn't. That's fake news. Would he'd say? He is a proven and corrupt journalist. There was no conversation. That's tomorrow's news. There was no conversation. He's invented it. It's entirely invented. He's made the whole thing up. He's fake news.
Okay, so the 3 points that I want to pick up on is, firstly, hypocrisy. Is the Republicans were all over Hillary Clinton like a bad suit for using insecure email, and they made it one of their attack. They made it one of their attack vectors when they were trying to discredit her in the 2016 election. So it's utter hypocrisy. Second thing, there's willful ignorance involved here. You're not allowed to conduct classified conversations in the US using Signal. It's a breach of federal law. I'm pretty sure it's the Espionage Act. Now, they must have known that. And if they didn't know that, what does that tell us about their competence? And also, the reason they're not allowed to use things like Signal or WhatsApp, God help us, is because under federal law, they are required to keep records of all communications. And, of course, Signal has a disappearing message facility, and therefore you have to ask why is it they're going to conduct strategic issues over Signal with a facility where all their discussions and debates can be deleted. And interestingly, going back to Hegseth denial, National Security Council spokesman, a chap called Brian Hughes, he actually contradicted Hegseth and turned around. He said, yeah, at the time the message thread was reported, I'm quoting here from The Atlantic, from Politico. At this time, the message thread that was reported appears to be authentic. We're reviewing how an inadvertent number was added to the chain. So you've got the National Security Council saying, sorry, the Secretary of State for Defence is probably telling a porcupine.
Well, he hasn't denied that the breach happened. He's denied the thing that Jeffrey Goldberg felt he couldn't actually share in detail because it would compromise. I mean, that is one of the most disgusting acts of treachery that you can imagine, because he's looked at the details like a weasel in a sack and he's thought, oh, good, the journalist hasn't actually posted what I said, so I can deny that I said it. Because the journalist has done the decent thing, I can be even more indecent.
Absolutely. If I go to my third point, which is geostrategic ignorance, Vance's comments on trade through the Red Sea just show the level of utter, ignorance these people have. Because he turned around and said, oh, it's only going to impact on 3% of the US trade, and why are we bailing out the Americans? And Hegseth said, pathetic. The impact on US trade is far more serious because US deliveries to markets in Asia and the Middle East, they account for about 50% of the total eastward transit flows via the Suez Canal and through the Red Sea. So actually the impact on US mercantile shipping is vastly more significant than it is to the Europeans. And so what he said was simply utterly wrong.
Well, I have to take your word for that. But if they've said the wrong stuff on Fox News, it's not beyond... I mean, it's entirely credible that they would just repeat whatever, propaganda line they'd heard most recently.
Absolutely. Well, I'm more than happy to share with the producer the data source after.
No, I don't doubt you. Of course, I don't. You've been of enormous help over the years in discussing matters like this. The question then becomes whether or not enough damage has already been done, and suddenly the relevance of the conversation about the speed with which Trump's people have acted becomes absolutely pertinent, absolutely clear, because we could be in a position where the Department of Justice and the FBI don't even investigate this because he's already got he's either got them on the run, got them frit, or got his people in charge.
Yeah, there's a couple of other points if I might. This just shows it's another stick that Vance is using, any stick available with which to beat the Europeans. And it's another clanging example, if one was needed, of the US pivot from what I'm describing as traditional allies to historic enemies. Because there's no other way of reading it. They're turning around and saying, bloody European, beg your pardon.
That's all right.
Flipping Europeans, we've got to bail them out again.
Is that a common trope in American politics? I mean, has there been a quiet caucus of people who feel this way? Or is it a new phenomenon? Do we know?
I think they're called the government, aren't they?
No, don't be glib. You know what I mean. Is Vance voicing something that's been bubbling under the surface for a long time, or because the alternative is that he's just saying whatever the Kremlin wants to hear?
I think, not being glib, I think the answer to that...
I told you off. That sounded like a school teacher then. My apologies.
Yes, I'm sorry for being glib.
Don't be glib. 100 times. I will not be glib on James O'Brien's programme.
I won't be glib. Well, don't beat me. I didn't go ample force. What you could do, I think probably it would be improper for me to make any comment about what Americans think about it. Therefore, we'd need an American listener to call in on that. But all this links into my inescapable conclusion that the current US regime is characterised by utter, dangerous, strategic incompetence. There is no other reading for it. And everything that we do, every international relationship that was previously predicated on having Pax Americana to backstop what we are trying to do, I think has been fundamentally undermined. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we should all go back under the table where I'm cowering. But what it does mean is that it's a very good wake-up call for Europe to say, you know what, we can no longer depend on the US as a reliable ally. We are simply going to have to go it alone. And the Ukrainians obviously have picked up on this. Yes. And I talk a lot to some very smart people in Ukraine. And they are significantly more, I wouldn't say relaxed, but they are significantly more cynical about the Americans than the Americans would say that Ukraine's position is. Because the world's biggest producer of drones at the moment, attack drones, is Ukraine.
Ukraine, yes.
And Ukraine knows that the war is going to be largely won and fought on the battlefield by the ability to deploy both UAVs and UCAVs, which are surveillance drones, and what's called first-person vision drones, which means you can attack something and to take out a tank with a $350 drone. Wow. So the Ukrainians are much more, I hesitate to use the word relaxed, but they are far more objective about the relationship. Sanguine, yeah, because they also pointed out that everybody turns around and says, oh, God's sake, if the Americans turn off the arms tap, this is going to be the end of the world. No, the Americans turned it off for 6 months in 2024, and the Ukrainians managed. And when you look at what Germany has done, which is to take the lid off their debt restructuring ability, so they can now pump hundreds of billions of euros into their defence industry, the one thing that Russia is terrified of is German rearmament. And that's precisely what the Ukraine has achieved in Europe. And so we get this position whereby you have a fundamentally, I think it's not unfair to say, corrupt and duplicitous regime in the White House. And it pains me to say that, having worked for years with the American military and the American intelligence community. You have a regime there which is, through the ripples and the shockwaves that are emanating out across the Atlantic to Europe, is going to force the Europeans to say, you know what, we are actually going to have to stand up and prove that we matter again. We count. We're important.
And that's a big silver lining. And it's the most upbeat analysis that anyone will be able to provide or find. If I were to be glib for a moment, what you're describing is, from a Ukrainian point of view, hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Absolutely.
And they know that the worst is coming, because there's no earthly way that Donald Trump is going to abide by the United States historical commitments. Absolutely no way at all. And it's good to know that the capabilities that Ukraine will have, as has been clear since the very beginning of this invasion, this illegal invasion, the nimbleness, the resolution, the bravery, the courage of Ukraine, as embodied by Volodymyr Zelensky, who was so royally insulted in the Oval Office just a couple of weeks ago, has taken the Kremlin by surprise. And albeit that the Kremlin and the White House are now, by the Kremlin's own account, in absolute lockstep with each other, committed to the same interests, I'll say it again, by the Kremlin's own account, it doesn't change the nimbleness, if you like, that Anthony in Bletchley Park describes.
Is it safe to come out now? Wasn't he brilliant? I thought he made a brilliant point about the hypocrisy of the Hillary Clinton emails. Remember, lock her up. Now I wonder if MAGA, Trump, Fox News and the Republican Party will demand those responsible to be locked up. I bet they won't. They're already attacking the reporter already, aren't they? You know. Yes, apparently it's his fault for carelessly allowing someone else to add him to this Signal chat. Also, what he said about the use of the Signal chat was very interesting for me anyway. But can you imagine if Kamala Harris had actually won the election and this happened? Can you imagine how understanding our Magaloons, our Mango Mussolini, Fox News, the Republican Party and all those extreme right-wing podcasts would have been? Somehow I don't think they would have said, well, it could have happened to anyone. They would have been talking about this right up to the next election, every hour of every day, demand that those responsible be sacked and jailed and possibly hung, drawn and quartered for espionage. And Kamala Harris will be impeached and imprisoned for being a woman and black, I suppose. But because it's our powder puff that's in charge, nothing to see here, so move along. But I did find what he had to say about Ukraine and drones quite fascinating. No, I didn't know anything about all that sort of stuff, so it was interesting. And the reason why I didn't know, probably because some stuff like Ukraine is quite toxic for my channel. It's similar to stuff like the Middle East and Palestine, you know, stuff like that, toxic. Doesn't do very well, so I just tend to stay away. But I did find what he had to say on the drones very interesting. But what do you guys think? Let me know down below. And if you enjoy everything, House of Commons and Select Committee meetings, please give it a like and subscribe, and I shall bid you farewell and take care, my friends. I'm going to hide.